unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect Dharma is rarely met with even 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So I think we will give this morning's talk the title of Coming Home to a Place We've Never Been Before. Some of you my age may recognize that as part of a lyric to a John Denver song, coming home to a place he'd never been before. I mean it a little bit differently from what the song implies. What the song implies is wonderful, that the home we've never been before is not that we've been lazy and not come home before. We've come home before, but that was not the home that is always here, the home that is always now. If home is always now, we're always coming home to a home we've never been before. So just a little clarification that I mean a little bit differently from how John Denver means it in his song. Because I presented the notion of return as a ubiquitous element in spiritual traditions. And the most succinct presentation is in the Tao Te Ching. Return is the motion of the Tao. Yielding is the way of the Tao. 10,000 things are born from being. Being is born from non-being. 4 short lines that are packed with meaning. I spent some time trying to unpack that meaning, comparing to Dogen quotes and other sources. That return, pun intended, is a pivotal element in all spiritual traditions, making that return, that coming home. And then recently, I suggested that begs the question: return from where and return to where? And last Dharma talk, I presented prapanka, that Sanskrit term. In Pali, it's papanka, as the exile from which we return. And I gave commentary on I think it's Princeton Dictionary of Buddhism that I shared to kind of like give you some firm knowledge of the full meaning of that term. And that excerpt from the dictionary is posted on our Facebook page. I encourage referring back to it and always refreshing and deepening your understanding of this very, very important term. Prapanka, I would suggest, is an explication, an unfoldment of the second noble truth. The second noble truth of the Buddha is the cause of suffering. The term used there is tanha or trishna, which etymologically means thirsting. And more practically speaking, self-clinging is the second noble truth. The thirst is for the fundamental thirst is for the thirst to establish the self, to make real this unreal thing, this mirage that we experience called the self. And so that's the thirst, to establish a sense of self. And so self-clinging is a shorthand. Prapanka is the engine, the mechanism, the whole detailed presentation of how that second noble truth runs. Prapanka means mental proliferation, conceptual proliferation. On the gross level, the monkey mind. The monkey mind is the manifestation of the second noble truth of self-clinging. Got to keep the system going so I don't disappear. Got to keep thinking. We don't know that consciously, but the Buddha suggests that underlying that perpetual restlessness of the monkey mind is a fear of no self, which is who we actually are. But that's on the gross level. Prapanka is the monkey mind. On the subtle level, Prapanka is just the tendency to always be in a modality of self-referential thinking, feeling, and experiencing, and always living in the subject-object modality of awareness, and sometimes assuming that that's the only or the most legitimate form of awareness. And so that was last Dharma talk. That was, what we're seeking to return from. The exile is, unpacked. That's Prapanka. That's the second noble truth of self-clinging. Self-clinging robs us of our home, our actual home. And so today I want to try to begin at least to have a home warming party of sorts, to kind of like look at what homecoming is like. And I intend to share two documents. One is Dogen, the Jijuyu Zanmai, usually translated as the self-receiving and self-employing samadhi, a treatise to expound upon the notion in Genjo Koan of to carry yourself forward to experience myriad things is delusion, to carry a self forward and see objects, the subject-object modality is delusion. Buddhism is kind of hard on the subject-object modality. We need to update that a little bit, but there's a good reason for it. So to carry yourself forward, experience myriad things is delusion, that the myriad things come forth and realize themselves, or another version of it, that the myriad things come forth and realize the self is awakening. So Jijuyu Zanmai is like, what is that second thing like? The myriad things coming forth and realizing the self. What is that like? Jijuyu Zanmai is all about that. But before then, I want to present some teaching of Moses Cordovero, a 16th century Kabbalist in Safed, Israel, and kind of like, compare the two. But to get into that, I wanted to share some limitless thoughts with you. Some limitless thoughts. What do I mean by that? When I was a kid, when I was in elementary school, I was fascinated and troubled by the notion of infinity. I would lie in bed, specifically limitless space, infinite space, space extending in all directions. I'd lie in bed, say, how can things extend in all directions? How is that possible? There must be a partition at some point. There must be a wall. But a partition, a wall, implies that which is beyond the partition. And I would just spin these two, how can things go on limitlessly? That just, it boggled my mind. But so limitless extension boggled my mind. I couldn't get my mind around that. But my mind saw a limitation in the notion of limitation. My mind could easily leap beyond the notion of a partition, but once it left beyond the notion of a partition, it kind of couldn't handle that, couldn't get my mind around that. And I loved doing this. I would lie in bed for hours just trying to suss this out because I couldn't. And I ended up in some liminal space, an in-between space between what I could know and what seemed like would be forever unknowable. And as I matured into my tweens and then my early teens, that became a very key feature, loving that liminal space. That there's something uncanny about just being here. Something uncanny about each and every tiny thing about being alive. And I became so intrigued with that in moments of awe where the mind was, those pinball machines, if you hit them too hard, they go tilt. Trying to seek out tilt modes for my mind. I was really, which is why I'm calling it a liminal space, seeking out tilt modes for my mind. I did that a lot as a kid. And so this notion of, of limitlessness, of infinity, is really, and the inconceivable, the concrete inconceivable, that the inconceivable is not a mental abstraction, it's what we're in the midst of all the time. But for an abstract illustration, there's a limitless set, an infinite set, and this is an important point. So when I make this point, I want you to kind of hang on to it for a bit, for what comes later. Between the number 1 and 2, there's an infinite set of real numbers. 1/3, 1/6, 1/8, on to infinity. Within the numbers 1 and 3, there's also an infinite set of real numbers, which is larger than the infinite set between 1 and 2. So there are larger and smaller infinities. That's a mathematical fact. That there's varying sizes of infinities, and yet they're all infinities at the same time. Infinity equals infinity, and also there are greater and larger infinities. But they're equally infinite, but they're greater and larger. In human thought, this is contradictory, but on some realm, they can be equal and greater and less than at the same time, in a certain sense, in a certain nature. And so that point of greater and larger infinity, greater and smaller infinities, both equally being infinite, is the point I want you to hang on to as we look at Moses Cordovero. Once again, Moses Cordovero was a 16th century Kabbalist rabbi. In Safed, Israel was a hotbed of Jewish mysticism in the 15th and 16th century. People were emigrating to Israel to just study Kabbalah big time in that period of time. And another famous Kabbalist, Isaac Luria, the Holy Ari, the Great Lion, immediately followed Cordovero in Safed and became the most well-known elaborator of Kabbalah. Kabbalah, has ancient roots, but it continues to develop to this day. And a caveat, I'm fascinated with Kabbalah. I study it, but I'm by no means an established Kabbalah scholar. It's an avocation. Zen is my vocation. Kabbalah is an avocation which I enjoy a lot and get a lot of benefit from. But take everything I say about Kabbalah with that caveat. It's an avocation for me. So this is what Cordovero says: an impoverished person thinks that God is an old man with a white hair and beard sitting on a wondrous throne of fire that glitters with countless sparks. And so he later says that the book of Daniel says this kind of thing. So an impoverished person, not financially, but a spiritually impoverished person, thinks that God is an old man with white hair sitting on a wondrous throne of fire that glitters with countless sparks. So a spiritually impoverished person thinks of God as that, that typical, anthropomorphized version, like Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel painting. Imagining this and similar fantasies, the fool corporealizes God. So that's the problem. You corporealize God. You create an idol, an image, a mental construct of something physical. He falls into one of the traps that destroy faith. So, creating a corporealization of God, creating an image of God, destroys faith, Cordovero says. his awe of God is limited by his imagination. That's interesting, that sentence. His awe of God is limited by his imagination. So, anything we imagine, anything we conceive will limit our actual being, our actual living. In this context, our actual being, our actual living is our awe of God, our awe of infinity, that our ability to put the mind on tilt is limited by whatever we conceive, by whatever we imagine. In other words, don't take, we can't not imagine, but don't take it literally. See it only as a painting of a rice cake. See it only as some representation from which we might make a leap. At best, that's what all images can do for us. But if you are enlightened, you know God's oneness. You know the divine is devoid of bodily categories. So he's making an assertion here that divine is devoid of bodily categories, but then he flips this around later. These can never be applied to God. Then you want, so if you're enlightened, you know God's oneness. You know that the divine is devoid of bodily categories. The divine is inconceivable. These categories, whatever, any conceptual category can never be applied to God. Then you wonder, astonished, who am I? So Cordovero is saying, don't try to figure out who God is. You're going to fail. Try to figure out who you are. And this is commentary. You're going to fail there too, but you're going to fail viscerally, because you are. You are, and yet you can't find yourself. That's my conjecture. Then you wonder, astonished, who am I? Because I obviously am, but what? To study the self. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. What is this phenomena, I, that's going on here? This arising awareness, this arising experience. What the heck is it? Cordovero was suggesting that's what you do. You don't create a fancy image of God. Study the self. He's in line with Dogen. Study the self. And then I'm a mustard seed within the sphere of the moon. So who am I? So the sphere of the moon is the sphere implied by the moon's orbit. The diameter of the sphere is the orbit, and so that's the sphere of the moon. But that whole sphere itself is also mustard seed within the next sphere, and so on. And so it is within that sphere and all it contains in relation to the next sphere. So Rabbi Daniel Mott, who translated the Zohar and gave this talk from which I took this, analogously says, okay, so I'm like a little speck on the earth, but the earth is like a little speck in the solar system, which is a little speck in the galaxy, which is a little speck in the billions of galaxies that comprise the observable universe, and so it's kind of like encountering the palpable limitlessness of being. That's what Cordovero was suggesting. That's the step to take, the first step. Don't try to conceive of God. Wake up to what's right in front of you, this limitlessness that's right in front of you. The limitlessness that freaked out Pascal. Pascal couldn't handle it. He says, I'm filled with terror with the eternal silence of infinite spaces. I freak out. But Cordovero says, stand your ground there. Feel that. Feel that. He says, if you feel that, your awe is invigorated. Your mind can go on full tilt very readily. If you can stand your ground in that space of the limitlessness that's palpably in your face. Stand your ground there. Your awe is invigorated. The love and your soul expands. Now remember, a fraction of infinity is itself infinite. So that's the other point that Cordovero now goes to. A fraction of infinity is not, this is not his words. That's Daniel Mott's words that I stole. Each of us has something of the infinite within us, because regardless of what fraction of, because we are a part of the whole, we're stardust. We're the remnants of an exploding supernova. And so if the universe is limitless, if we're 1/10 trillionth, billionth, whatever, of some fraction of the universe, then we're also limitless. And this is a crude way of pointing out the limitlessness of our being, but it's maybe not irrefutable, but it's fairly compelling. That, if the universe is limitless, and if we, by definition, are a fraction of the universe, then we are also limitless. A fraction of infinity is itself infinite. That's Mott's commentary on what Cordovero was trying to show, first of all, by the mustard seed analogy. Feel the limitlessness in your face. Get in there, tilt your mind with it. Then he goes on to say, however, he doesn't say however, but he's flipping it on its head here. The essence of divinity is found in every single thing, Cordovero says. Nothing but it exists. Since it causes everything to be, no thing can live by anything else. It enlivens them. Its existence exists in each existent. That's a fancy sentence. Its existence exists in each instance of existence. Do not attribute duality to God. Let God be solely God. If you suppose that Ein Sof is a Hebrew word which means the limitless, it's a name for God. It's like the primal name for God before emanation into masculine and feminine. In Kabbalah, God emanates into masculine and feminine, but before then, God has no gender. Ein Sof, the limitless. And another word is Ayin, which means nothingness. The primal nature of God is nothingness, limitlessness. limitless nothingness, shunya. Very, very analogous to shunya in Jewish mysticism. The primal version of God is shunya, basically. And so that's what he means by Ein Sof. If you suppose that Ein Sof emanates to a certain point, and from that point on, everything is outside of Ein Sof, you have dualized God. God forbid, he says. Realize rather that Ein Sof exists in each existence. The limitless God exists in each existence. That's what he's saying. The unconstructed God, the unemanated God. This is God before emanation. The nothingness of God exists in each existence. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. That which is form is emptiness. That which is emptiness is form. Saying, I think, the exact same thing. Realize rather that Ein Sof, limitless nothingness of God, exists in each existence. Do not say that this is a stone and not God. God forbid. Rather, all existence is God, and the stone is a thing pervaded by divinity. So, some might lazily call this pantheism. Some might try to be more subtle and call it panentheism. Pantheism means everything is God. And he does say that, but he also contextualizes it with, the mustard seed and the limitlessness. Panentheism means that everything is inside of God. It's a subtler version of pantheism. But this is something that it's not quite clear how he says it, but I feel it's implied in what he says it, that it's realizational. It's something that isn't pre-existent. The immanence transcendence of God is not a pre-existent understanding of things. It's what we bring about by our choice of modalities of awareness. if we realize form is emptiness, emptiness is form, then we realize this world that until we realize it, it's only a latency. It's not an actuality. It's kind of like the Ayin Ein Sof is God as latency. God is not yet manifest. And and that's, although he doesn't get quite so explicit with that here, it's implied in Kabbalah, in Tikkun, raising the divine sparks, which is for a later talk. But so that's, but I propose that that's Cordovero's description of what in the Judaic tradition you would call restoration or redemption, which or what homecoming is like, to live realizationally, to live seeing that, don't say that this is that, that's God and that's a stone. You've created duality. There is no God separate from the stone. Just like in that image of the mustard seed, the limitlessness is nothing but limitless mustard seeds. There's not some limitlessness in which the mustard seeds are contained. The mustard seeds are the manifestation of the limitless universe, each one, kind of like Indra's net, which I won't define this morning, because I want to go to Dogen, I want to go to Jijuyu Zanmai, and I think, how much time we got? I think my tech, I want to read the whole thing first, and it's not the whole thing, this is an excerpt of it, before trying to give it a commentary, and just let it flow, and then with the time remaining, I'll try to provide some commentary. So this is not the entire Jijuyu Zanmai. And the Jijuyu Zanmai is a section of Bendowa, a full fascicle of Genjo Koan. It's a wonderful section that was pulled out, I don't know by whom initially, but it's a Zen Center chant, and other Zen centers also use this as a chant, but it's pulled out of a larger fascicle called Bendowa, on the endeavor of the way. When even for a moment, coming home to a place you've never been before, it's a momentary, home is always a moment kind of thing. When even for, I'm giving commentary, I was going to read the thing first. So any case, let me have some tea. When even for a moment you express the Buddha's seal, the Buddha Mudra, in the three actions by sitting upright in samadhi, the whole phenomenal world becomes the Buddha's seal, and the entire sky turns into enlightenment. Because of this, all Buddha Tathagatas, although all Buddha thus come ones, as the original source, increase their Dharma bliss and renew their magnificence in the awakening of the way. Furthermore, all beings in the 10 directions and the 6 realms, including the 3 lower realms, at once obtain pure body and mind, realize the state of great emancipation, and manifest the original face. At this time, all things realize correct awakening. Myriad objects partake of the Buddha body, and sitting upright under the tree of awakening, you immediately leap beyond the boundary of awakening. At this moment, you turn the unsurpassably great Dharma wheel and expound the profound wisdom, ultimate and unconditioned. Because such broad awakening resonates back to you, it helps you inconceivably, you will in Zazen unmistakably drop away body and mind. Panka, drop away that self-clinging. You will in Zazen unmistakably drop away body and mind, cutting off the various defiled thoughts from the past, and realize the essential Buddha Dharma. Thus you will raise up Buddha activity in innumerable, infinite practice places of Buddhist Tathagatas everywhere cause everyone to have the opportunity of ongoing Buddhahood and vigorously uplift the ongoing Buddha Dharma. Because earth, grass, trees, walls, tiles, and pebbles all engage in Buddha activity, those who receive the benefit of wind and water caused by them are inconceivably helped by the Buddha's guidance, splendid and unthinkable, and awaken intimately to themselves, to their actual selves. Those who receive these water and fire benefits spread the Buddha's guidance based on original awakening. Because of this, all those who live with you and speak with you will obtain endless, limitless, infinite Buddha virtue, and will unroll widely, inside and outside of the entire universe, the endless, unremitting, unthinkable, unnameable Buddha Dharma. All this, however, does not appear within perception because it is unconstructedness and stillness. It is immediate realization. If practice and realization were two things, as it appears to an ordinary person, each could be recognized separately. A quick parenthetical. Don't dualize God. If practice and realization were two things, as it appears to an ordinary person, each could be recognized separately. What can be recognized is not realization itself, because realization is not reached by a deluded mind. In stillness, mind and object merge in realization and go beyond enlightenment. Nevertheless, because you are in the state of self-fulfilling samadhi, without disturbing its quality or moving a particle, you extend the Buddha's great activity, the incomparably profound and subtle teaching. Grass, trees, and lands which are embraced by this teaching together radiate a great light and endlessly expound the inconceivable profound Dharma. Grass, trees, and walls bring forth the teaching for all beings, common people as well as sages, and they in accord extend this Dharma for the sake of grass, trees, and walls. Thus, the realm of self-awakening and awakening others invariably holds the mark of realization, with nothing lacking, and realization itself is manifested without ceasing for a moment. This being so, the zazen of even one person at one moment imperceptibly accords with all things and fully resonates through all time. There are greater and lesser infinities, but they're equally infinite. The zazen of even one person at one time imperceptibly accords with all things and fully resonates through all time. Thus, in the past, future, and present of the limitless, infinite universe, this zazen carries on the Buddha's teaching endlessly. Each moment of zazen is equally wholeness of practice. Each mustard seed is the whole. Each moment of zazen is equally wholeness of practice, equally wholeness of realization. This is practiced not only while sitting, it is like a hammer striking emptiness. Before and after, its exquisite peal permeates everywhere. How can it be limited to this moment? Hundreds of things all manifest original practice from the original face. It is impossible to measure. Know that if even all the Buddhas of the 10 directions, as limitless as the sands of the Ganges, exerted their strength and with the Buddha's wisdom tried to measure the merit of one person's zazen, they will not be able to fully comprehend it. So I see quite a parallel between Cordovero's, admonishment not to try to conceptualize or corporealize God. Everything is God. And Dogen's explication of true being outside of Prapanca. What happened here? Let me see if I want to underscore a few things. So this notion of, how to put this? When I think back about my struggle, my playful struggle in bed to wrap my mind around infinity, that things can't go on forever in all directions. My mind can't grasp that. And yet, if my mind can grasp a barrier, but in the midst of grasping the notion of a partition, I immediately leap beyond the partition. There has to be beyond the partition, and that has to be an endless regress of beyond the partition. And so when I reflect on my playful wanting to tilt my mind with that, this has something to do with the notion of immanence transcendence. As static conceptual categories, they just don't quite fit the reality that Dogen is speaking of, the reality that Cordovero is speaking of, that all things are God is not something we can get our minds around through establishing these categories of immanence and transcendence. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form is not something that we can come up with an adequate conceptual framework to appreciate. The fact that all things are God, that all things are spirit, all things reveal the original face, is only realizable through practice, through dropping body and mind, through coming home to the inconceivable that is our essence and our birthright. And I think that's the way to understand when he says in the beginning of this excerpt that I created, when even for a moment, in the moment, you express the Buddhist seal in the three actions by sitting upright in samadhi, by doing zazen, by not thinking, by dropping self-clinging, creating that little peephole through prapanka that I was talking about. When even for a moment you break through self-clinging in practice, you practice dropping body and mind, you practice forgetting the self. When even for a moment you do that, or rather, I would say, this is a translation, maybe Dogen said it like this: if for a moment, in the moment that you express the Buddha seal by sitting upright in samadhi, in that moment, everything is God. You are God. Rocks are God. Everything shows the Buddha's face. In that moment, the whole phenomenal world becomes the Buddha seal, and the entire sky turns into enlightenment. It's something. It's immanence, transcendence. Those categories are static. They got no juice. They have no pulse. They're concepts. As concepts, they're mere prapanka. They're part of the exile. But when you realize the Buddha way, you express the Buddha seal, you enter into that word, you bring forth God, you fix God. This is Kabbalah once again. You realize God. God is a latency to be realized in practice. And I'm mixing terminology deliberately to try to show you what I feel Dogen is getting at. That immanence transcendence is something to be done. It's something to be accomplished. It's a possibility requiring us. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form, is only a theory until you actually accomplish it. When you bring forth the moon in your practice. Make the moon real, make the moon actual. In Gyoji, Circle of the Way, another Dogen fascicle, Dogen says, because of this practice, there is the sun and the moon and the stars. Because this practice, there is the great earth and the vast sky. That's immanence transcendence. That's formless emptiness. Emptiness is form. It requires us, it requires practice. We bring forth our home. We return. And we bring everybody with us. Great rejoicing. My mind just flashed to the prodigal son, right? Where the son, he arrogantly wants to get his inheritance and have fun. He has fun for a while, then he crashes and burns and ends up in the gutter, and he says, well, shit, I'm gonna die. Maybe if I go home, I don't deserve to be my father's son anymore, but maybe he'll have mercy on me and let me eat with the pigs. And so he trots down the road, or not trots, he kind of sulks down the road with his father sees him from far off and says, hey, wow, man, let's have a party. Let's kill the fatted calf and, bring out the good wine, because, here comes my son. He was dead, now he's alive. Nothing but rejoicing. You don't have to repent and correct anything. Any efforts to repent and correct anything just is the perpetuation of exile. It's just more prapanka, just more creating, just more self-clinging. So anyway, that's pretty much what I had in mind today, is to present two versions of what coming home looks like. What stepping outside of believing in subject-object as the only veridical way of being alive looks like. It's quite wonderful, quite plain at the same time. We didn't really cover that, but we covered more the wonder of it. But wonder is a doorway. That's, awe is a doorway. We tend to assume that subject-object is legitimate and perhaps the real modality to live. But when we encounter wonder, when we encounter awe, we're kind of forcefully pushed beyond perceiving in subject object. We're overwhelmed, the mind goes tilt, and we're no longer perpetuating prapanka, perpetuating the self. Seeing the birth of my son, seeing Yosemite Valley for the first time, or as T.S. Eliot says, music heard so deeply that it's not heard at all, but you are the music while the music lasts. We have experiential evidence that subject-object is not the only mode of awareness for the human being. We have that evidence in everybody's experience. It's a perennial pandemic experience, awe, wonder, peak experiences, much other than the routine subject-object, which for most people, sadly, is routine. These are descriptions of the wonder of venturing beyond that, and the proposition that that's our true nature. That's realer than the prapanka. The prapanka in Buddhism is delusion. The prapanka in Buddhism is a cocoon obscuring our true nature. There was another thought that I was going to end on, but it's escaping me now. Yeah, so this morning my intent was to share these two things with you as a descriptive presentation, a painting of the rice cake of home. It's not actual home. Actual home is only this moment through practice, but it's hopefully it's inspiring rice cake painting. an inspiring painting, and nothing more. I hope in future talks to talk more specifically about the practice, you know, what that practice consists of, the nature of the effort, using rice cake paintings and metaphors once again, because that's all that, that's all that we can do aside from just being. So here's the closing thought, something that I think fits into this exceedingly well. I'm quite pleased I thought of it right now, and I'm moved a little bit by it. It fits into this as a closing thought. It fits into this exceedingly well, and I also posted it on our Facebook page some days ago. And it's a quote from the book, not the movie, but the book, The Fault in Our Stars. I forget the author's name right now, but I haven't forgotten the line. And this is the closing line. And my friends, please choose I recommend, use this as a mantra for yourself, address yourself with, this quote from the book, you are so busy being you that you don't have time to realize how unprecedented you are. You are so busy being you that you have no time to realize how unprecedented you are. May our intention equally extend to every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it.